Hello and welcome to the first DIY Makerspaces course. This will be one of 3 courses. I'm your host, Joel Kaplan, the founder of Thought Africa. And today I'm going to be taking you through a couple of components to enable you to build your own makerspace. We have a very, very, very special guest on the other side waiting to join this call who will be helping me talk through a range of different concepts around makerspaces, from budgeting to cross-curricular activities, understanding computer numerical control devices like laser cutters, 3D printers, and CNC routing machines. And we're just going to have a little bit of fun around the conversation. I'll be taking you through a demo of our online course that you'll be able to have access to from the 1st of October to be able to access all our content on DIY Makerspaces. So our special guest today is Karen Walstra. Karen's been in the education space for quite some time now. She's helped me over the past 3 or 4 years with the education component to what I've been doing. And it's very exciting to see some of the things she's been up to at the moment.
Oh, I'm so excited. You know how I love makerspaces and how to get people thinking around using them. So I'm excited to be in this discussion today.
So one of the first components with makerspaces, for me personally, is what I consider one of the most important things, although there's many, many aspects, but is branding the space and making it very, very relevant. But branding doesn't necessarily mean just creating a brand for the sake of it with a logo, but making that brand relatable. And we want to just take you through a little bit on how you can make that brand relatable. Karen, I would love to get some of your advice on some of these things that we're going to be going through. But from a branding component, I always refer to Simon Sinek. I'm sure you've watched his Why, How, and What video on YouTube. It went viral at some stage. You got around to watching that video before? So he speaks about how it's exceptionally important to illustrate your why and your brand first, to be able to connect with people on a belief system first. And for us, when we look at that and creating your brand for your makerspace, is why should kids come into your space? Why should parents buy into it? Why should your school governing body or the organization you're working with buy into the makerspace that you're wanting to create? So the Simon Sinek video, if you haven't been able to watch it, I'd suggest after this, go and have a look. It is How Great Leaders Inspire Action. So Karen, if I had to ask you, why would you want a makerspace if you were building one tomorrow?
So I really think the why is critical in terms of why we're doing it. I agree completely. So why would I do it? I would look at what are the circumstances around what I'm wanting to do? What kind of school am I in? What kind of resources do we have? And where do we want to take our children into the future? And from that say, so why am I doing this? What is my reasoning? Because for everything we do within our schools, there should be the why. We should be able to answer the why. And so I don't think there's one size fits all. It depends on the context. It depends on the school. It even depends on the teacher who's in that classroom at that time. And if they left, what are they leaving in terms of a legacy for the next person to take over? So the why is really critical.
So if I had to just rattle through it quickly, your why would be connecting with someone on a belief system. Your how would be how it would benefit the user. The what is what can actually be experienced within that brand or in that space. And that equals the who, which is who you are or who your brand is. So your why plus your how plus your what is equal to your who. So as with that in mind, it's always good to kind of immediately just jump into the practical side of things. So if you are sitting wanting to make your own makerspace at school, I'm going to be just jumping right ahead because we're going to be going through a workbook as well as a proposal template, budgets, and a whole bunch of other things. So just jumping right into creating a brand, we have put in our course here that we would encourage you to select a color palette for your makerspace is one of the first things. And colors are exceptionally important with the way they influence the way kids will think within the space, the way you'll think within the space. So we've used the United Nations 17 Sustainable Goals as the color palette to be able to illustrate, part of the colors within your brand. And then just jumping through that, when it comes to branding, you want to create a nice name as well as a logo. So with that, instead of trying to illustrate and draw things by yourself, we have given you 3 websites that you can go and look at, which is Free Logo Design, Wix.com, which has got a cool logo maker, and logomaker.com, where you can go and create your own logos. With that, you also want to be able to create your own thought leaders that you can allow for people within your space to be able to relate to. And for us, thought leaders are people that are passionate people that have essentially done something within their own passion, and they've made a success of it. So we believe in putting these people within your space for kids to be able to aspire to be able to make global changes themselves. Have you got any comments to add on the branding side of things? I'm just going to jump right into the Makerspace workbook.
So I think the branding really tells you what you want to achieve in that room and what are the kinds of words and things that you put there. The thought leaders could be people who are old people from your school. It could be people you know of, people that the children admire, or it could be examples as Joel showed earlier. So think about what is relevant for your school and how would you inspire your children to think about the future.
Awesome, thank you. And within the content, we've created this Makerspace workbook where you can go through this content here, where you would be able to actually go through this exercise of illustrating why you want to do it. How is it going to benefit your learners? What is the look and feel? So maybe taking your school badge, your school colors, and an inspirational image as a start to be able to start illustrating what your Makerspace will start developing into. So if you go through this workbook, you'll find that there's a Microsoft Word doc attached there that you can download to be able to edit within it, or alternatively, you can edit it right within our platform, so you can go and make comments, you can highlight on it and do a whole bunch of things that would be useful to you. Then just jumping forward a little bit, we've created a proposal template that you're able to use. So it's a little bit of an introduction. You can go and fill in your why, how, and what. You can go and add in what technologies you're going to use, what colors, what your branding is going to look at, what posters and signage you're going to use. And essentially, this will be able to illustrate to the whether it be the school governing body or whoever you have to sell this concept to, of exactly what you want to achieve and what you can possibly achieve out of your Makerspace.
I think this kind of document is also really good to just get you thinking, and in terms of who you would share it with. So working through it just as the person who starts the ball rolling gets you to start thinking about your program and where you want to take your room to. And then when you start sharing it with other people, it can be adapted again and again. But you need some starting points. And if you've got something on a piece of paper, there's something to discuss. Whereas everything's just thoughts, it's much more difficult to implement in the long term.
Cool. So this part might be a little bit more extensive. Just to let everyone know that's watching this, we have created a budgeting template that you can use from 3D printers that you'd be able to choose from, laser cutters, CNC machines. We've got a whole list of suppliers that are available for you. And just really trying to get an understanding of what your forecast would be for the following year that you're wanting to implement this in. So this Makerspace that's selected here is quite a high budget, which is 554,000 Rand, which is quite expensive for most schools. It's quite uncommon. You can actually get away with a lot less. So let's talk sliding scale, all the way from the bottom, having a budget of, let's say, literally maybe 1,000 Rand or nothing, to a medium budget and then to a bigger budget.
The how, in terms of how are you going to get this money? Is it money that's CapEx kind of expenditure that you're looking at? Is it an existing budget that you're looking at? Or is it something that you want to put into next year's budget? So start off by looking at how are you going to get the money to do it? And then how are you going to achieve it in terms of, is it just a room where you're going to use the existing furniture and maybe just add a bit of equipment? Or are you going to go all out and rechange everything? So you need to think about how you want to achieve that. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, from my point of view, just kind of looking at if a school's got, say, no budget at all, and we've walked into schools where they've got pretty much nothing to be able to achieve a Makerspace with, we would encourage something called a breakerspace. So bringing in old technology, old computers, old microwaves, old anything. You've always suggested cut the plug points off, just so that no kids go and plug that in. But it's a really important statement here, which we're making is that you can actually achieve the same. We talk about computational thinking skills, analytical thinking skills, et cetera, et cetera. And you can actually achieve the same in a breakerspace where you've spent nothing at all on the space, but just giving kids different kind of projects. Could you give me a project example that would cost a teacher in a school absolutely nothing, where they could, again, achieve something that they could if they were spending 100,000 Rand on the tools?
So for me, I always think of 2-liter cool drink bottles and pairs of scissors. If you start setting projects with children just with their ordinary pairs of scissors that they've got in their stationery cases and 2-liter cool drink bottles, there is so much you can do just with those. They could become bird feeders or plant holders or vehicles or boats, and so it's, what do you want to achieve with your students? How are you getting them to think? And once you've thought that, look at what's available. What materials have you got to do that? So again, it's going to what's accessible. So definitely with no budget, it's how do you get children to think?
For sure. And that's an exercise that I've gone through this entire year with our Educare project and the WhatsApp chatbot, is how do we now illustrate practical activities to encourage these 21st century thinking skills, but with no budget and limited materials. And for us, on my LinkedIn profile, it says I'm great at Googling things. And it's because I love Google. And essentially, I just go and Google upcycled projects, upcycled STEAM education, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. And you can find a whole raft of resources on Pinterest, on Instructables, and a whole bunch of different websites. And even just going on to Google Images and just having a look at what pops up, it can inspire some cool ideas. And then say a school's got a budget of, say, about 100,000 Rand. I mean, so the teacher would obviously be choosing tools which are sometimes a bit biased more towards stuff that they enjoy doing. So, they may enjoy 3D printing, so they'll go that direction versus going virtual reality and augmented reality and robots, for example. How do you recommend someone looks at a budget where, for me, 100,000 Rand, I don't want to say an awkward budget, but it's not big and it's not small. It's just a budget. I mean, what would you suggest they do? Keep it for the year to use throughout the year, spend it all at once? What would be your advice to someone looking at a budget like that?
I do think it goes back to planning. So looking at what are you actually wanting your children to learn? And once you've decided what you want your children to learn, what tools and materials do you want to do that? So if you want to introduce 3D printing, well, then a 3D printer or two should be in that budget. But if you're not wanting to do 3D printing, perhaps you want more hand tools that you want your students to do. So again, it's really looking at what does your school want? What are the needs and the things within your school? And then how does it not just relate to the STEM type, perhaps extramural or a design and technology or a technology lesson, but how does it actually relate to more than one subject? Bring it into lots of subjects so that people can benefit from those types of tools. So talking to your colleagues, so maybe you've got an interest, but others might have something else. So then that might affect the budget as well, that it's not just one teacher's opinion, but that more people are actually putting input into it so that the space becomes used by more than one person. And so that budget can really be stretched. And if you get people's interests within that space, then it can really fly.
I've always said that a makerspace should represent a catalyst for creating change within a school. And part of that being a catalyst for that change, you need to have a champion within that space. And sometimes more than one champion, within a school, encouraging that space to be used, encouraging staff to collaborate. How would you encourage that champion that's watching this video now who's going, I've got a makerspace or I'm about to build a makerspace? But often you sometimes see the frustration coming from teachers who are these champions going, I can't get the collaboration out of the other teachers. It seems to be just creating additional work for them rather than this being something fun. So we know that teachers are bogged down with salespeople calling them with products that they must buy, parents calling them, their colleagues calling them, management calling them. How do you, as a champion with that catalyst, encourage more positivity within the school, encourage the collaboration? So that it comes back to how, as a champion, do you encourage, the use of this space and people really actively participating in it as a community? Because a makerspace is a community environment.
And I think that's what you just said there is important. It's how do you create that community space? And so therefore having the discussions with your colleagues at school and saying, what projects are you doing? What are the projects you're doing in 2 or 3 months' time that we could actually get equipment for? You know, if we did this project, it'll actually save you time, because perhaps the language teacher might get involved and the geography or science teacher from social sciences, and then I can get involved from a STEM point of view, and let's see how we can work together. And saying it's not going to add work to you, but it'll actually reduce the amount of work. And so how do we actually put activities together, but for the staff to see how they learn to use the tools, how they understand the space can be used, that it's not just the one person who knows how to use all the equipment, but that everybody knows how to use the equipment. But then importantly too, that the champion actually shows the example in terms of caring for the space, so that it's not left in a mess, so that when people come in, they know they're not coming to a space where tools haven't been packed away and things aren't looked after, that there's sort of a value around how we care for the space and respect each other from that point of view. So if I'm coming into the space with my class, I know I've got to leave it in a certain condition, so that when somebody else comes in, it's also in a nice space for them to work, and not something they've got to tidy up before they have to work. And so learning to share spaces, which is difficult for teachers because we're used to having our own spaces and not sharing. But once we build that community, that people feel they can use it, that they all value the resources and the tools, that they talk to each other about, oh, I'm using this material, that somebody isn't planning something with a material and somebody else starts something else and you go in and, oh, the material's gone. So having the chat around that too.
So let's jump right into the cross-curricular integration side of things. Karen. So let's talk here, straight onto it. Let's chat integrations.
So I think this is really important. I think often we teach in silos, which is not what we should do. We should actually be showing children why they're learning things and how those things relate to real life situations, but also giving them meaning to why they're learning it, whether it's maths or science or history. So what are the consequences? Why do we need to do that? So answering the question to the children in terms of, you learning this because this is how you could use it in the future, or this is what we can learn from the past. And so for me, integrations is really important. So I think when we think about this as a whole, there are a couple of aspects you need to think about. One, what is the topic that you're wanting to talk to? What are you trying to teach? And can this topic be across different subjects, or is it just one or two subjects, or is it only one subject? So what is the topic?
So if I'm able to address the topic there for a second, if you could imagine borrowing the theater of everyone's mind, you're sitting in your staff room, you've got your maths teacher, your English teacher, the technology champion in the makerspace, geography teacher, and the natural science teacher. And we've created a topic example next. So you're all sitting in this room together and you all go, cool, this is going to be the theme or the topic for the term. Do you say, maths teacher, what do you need to achieve? Is it fractions? Is it, what is it that you're wanting to achieve? English teacher, geography teacher, how would you go about that as the champion of the makerspace? You've obviously got to drive this and really take ownership within this space to, again, encourage those other teachers. So it's all well and dandy for us to talk about not teaching in silos, but how do we practically ask those teachers, where do you see this available, and how do we coordinate it so that everyone is working in some sort of a sync?
So I think that's where a series of meetings needs to be set up, and you need to then talk through those. So the first one might be, what are the actual topics that we're all doing over the next few months, and what does that end up being? What does this look like? And once people have decided that as a whole, then they already know what subject content relates to that topic. So say, for example, you might say, if we look at the sustainable goals and they chose something like water and sanitation as an example, then the maths person might be doing capacity and can do all the kinds of capacity type things. Or maybe they're doing graphs within the math space. So there they could then collect data around that. So then looking at the skills that you're going to do with that. Whereas the science teacher might look at water purification and how we could do experiments around that. And then the geography teacher might say, okay, well, let's look at rivers and dams and the consequences of dams and all of those kinds of things. So getting everybody then to give ideas in terms of a brainstorm around that. But once we've decided that, we need to actually say, so what are we going to do with all of this stuff? What classroom equipment do we need to do these different things? Are we going to be building a model town or a dam or a model river? What are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at from that kind of space? And then the next thing we might look at is we might say to them, okay, so once you've got all of that kind of information, what do we then look at in terms of, is this going to need extra material? Do we need to buy stuff, or are we going to ask children to bring stuff? Are we going to try and use just waste material? What does that kind of implication mean? And is it different materials for different subjects? And then what we need to look at, so what are we trying to achieve in every subject related to the outcomes and the objectives or the goals or whatever words you want to use around that. So each subject then puts their goals to what they're wanting to achieve within that space. And once they've done that, they would then talk about how we're going to actually flesh it out. So each class or each teacher would then say what we're going to do and how do these then interlink. Do we end up with a common project, or do we end up with lots of little bits that we share? And once we've done that, we look at, so how long is this going to take us? Is it hours? Is it weeks? Is it term? And put a whole planning document together. So if we think about, people talk about project-based learning or inquiry-based learning, that's basically what you're putting together. But you could do this continually on the go, or you could do it one-off during the year. But integrating with other subjects is really important. For me as a design and technology teacher, I remember what I saw years ago was in terms of, if you were doing something to do with measurement, you saw the gaps where children didn't know how to measure properly or didn't understand perspective. Or, for example, they couldn't write planning of making because their language skills were not good enough. So there are a whole lot of integrations that can happen that don't necessarily have to be subject orientated. It could be one topic, and you could say to the English teacher, this is what I'm going to do, but you could use this as a mark. So following instructions or writing a set of instructions. Or the maths teacher, you could say, would this be useful to you? So the integrations, you can also look at it from more than one perspective and saying, how do we actually integrate? But for me, the most important thing about the integration is having the discussion with the children, that the children start to understand why they're learning the maths that they're learning, why they're learning the language they're learning.
If I may add, I'm seeing a lot of passion coming from you around this topic. You've obviously been involved with Makerspaces for quite some time. We've engaged a lot around Makerspaces. It's evident that it's exceptionally important for the person that is championing the space, to be as passionate or have that passion and enthusiasm around this and really drive this project. So don't be scared to, communicate with even other schools if you're the champion, and phone the local school, whether it be a competing school or not, and pick up the phone and chat to that technology teacher, and don't be shy to ask for the help. I've noticed that within this education space, there's so many people with so much passionate knowledge. I mean, we heard Lindsay Wesner on your call chatting about not teaching in silos, and she has a lot of value to add around this. Drop her a question on Instagram. I know there's Dr. Francois Nordier, there's yourself. So if you're listening to this, go and find these people, go and drop them a call, drop them an Instagram message, or follow these teachers in the space and really just ask, get that advice and that guidance.
Whatever it is document it, track it, and get people involved. And show your passion. Be prepared to listen, and be prepared for not everybody to agree with you. Because if we really have a community, we don't always agree. So it's okay to not always agree, because sometimes you end up with a better product in the end. So have the chat. As Joel said, reach out to people, have huddles in the staff room around it. Ask for it to be on school agendas so that it's not just left to the last minute. Remind people. I know you might have to become a nag to say, hey, remember, we're wanting to do this project. I need info. And people might go, oh, come on. But just show them the benefits. Show them. Have afternoons where people can come and learn to use the tools for themselves. a child's birthday's coming up, so they learn how to 3D print something or learn how to laser cut something. So get people to see the value that they can see and how the tools can be used so that that can influence their subject. Geography teachers could go and cut all sorts of maps. Maths teachers could cut 3D shapes or print 3D shapes. So think about how you could inspire people with the tools and things that are there so that they become interested just like you are.
Creating a community, the one thing that I've noticed over the past couple of years is creating, for example, parent-student evenings. I noticed getting the parent community involved as well. You often find parents that are super passionate about, for example, 3D printing, or where if you get those parents involved where they've got industry experience in, for example, laser cutting or coding or arts and crafts, or even, for example, doing something within the marketing space or social media space, get those parents involved as well, because they can really also help drive management. They can help drive other teachers and just kind of get that momentum going within the space. So host monthly parent-student evenings where you host competitive challenges, host internal competitive challenges with staff. So getting staff to do, for example, an origami challenge or a spaghetti tower challenge, or skewer stick challenge. Really just get the community involved in really participating in well. If your headmaster or your management team, aren't that way inclined and don't really want to do it, force them into that classroom and really get them playing as well. Because when they can feel that value and experience what they could have experienced when they were kids at school, really just helps getting them to promote the makerspace for you.
Before you go off that, you used to do things called family fun evenings, and they were only an hour long, but they were so beneficial on so many ways. One, you're showing them your space. They seeing the tools. Children can show their parents projects they're working on. Parents can see all the thinking that happens through a project. And so it's really, really exciting to bring the parents in for those sessions. Don't make them long, make them short, make them family interactive things and keep it fun. And the benefits, you end up with tools or parents offering to buy tools for the center. It just is beneficial in so many ways. It builds the school community. So those evenings have just so many positive spin-offs.
So Michael Foster, thank you so much for the question. How do we ensure that teachers are keeping learners safe when using dangerous equipment like drills, jigsaws, Stanley knives? I know you and I have got very, very contradicting views on this, but yes, what is your view from a professional standpoint as a teacher? And then I'm going to give my opinion.
So Michael, I really think safety is exceptionally important. I do think that one, we need to teach children how to use tools safely. I think as teachers, we need to use the tools safely. So where they're going to be stored, how they're going to be used, I think children need to know that there should be safety posters around the classrooms, teaching children and reminding children things. For example, if you've got pillar drills, that they shouldn't have their ties around their necks, that they shouldn't have their long sleeves down, that they rolled up, that preferably the children have got safety aprons that they can wear to protect their school clothes. So for me, it's how do you do it? You do it because you teach them how to use things safely, and you teach them how to be responsible. So no running around in the room. How do you carry tools that are sharp? That you don't leave tools lying near the edge of a workbench when you want to, when you finish working, but you pack it away or you move it out of the way. So for me, it's making children also responsible in that space. But as the teacher, you need to know how to use it. And then you create that environment which is safe for the children to use in, because they know that when they come in there, this is what's expected of them.
So our good friend over at Google, just Googling classroom safety posters, you'll find a whole bunch of safety posters that are available. So safety first is obviously one of the first things that I'm seeing as just something that must be emphasized over and over and over again. So just to ensure that kids are conscious of the tools and the dangers around the tools. Mr. Foster, I'm going to give my opinion now, which is the opinion that I'm going to stand by, because I grew up in a workshop where the way I learned about safety was either getting burnt by a soldering iron, getting cut with a Stanley knife, and I would never, ever, ever, ever do it again. I was taught and told about the safety things. I was reminded about the safety things, but yes, kids still do get hurt with a standing knife or a soldering iron. Things do happen within a classroom space. I think it's also, as a teacher, just being conscious of what's happening within the classroom space and what kids are doing. But just in addition to that, you're only one person as a teacher. So what I found was also quite interesting to do was announcing kids as tech lab or makerspace leaders. So they would be the monitors within the space, the kids that are given that set of responsibilities to be able to also make sure that they are partly responsible for the safety within the space. It's also about having a first aid kit readily available should anything go wrong within a space. But these are, things go wrong on the sports field, things go wrong with all sorts of different things. So it's just, again, a matter of staying conscious and making sure that the kids are conscious of things as well. If you've just, sorry.
Just before you go off that, what you should do as a tech teacher, if you're using that, one, you should have done a first aid course. It just makes sense. And then if an accident happens, you should have a log. And it should be reported immediately to whoever is at school, so that your people, whether it's a head of department or the deputy or the principal, whichever way your school works, they know that an accident has happened, and the parents should be phoned. So it shouldn't just be left for a child to be told that they get home, but be proactive. But for me, I had almost no accidents in my classrooms. That I had one over the years where a child had put a standing knife on the edge of a table and another child bumped it off, and it hurt the child in the foot, and that wasn't nice. And I had a child who refused to wear an apron and had solder burnt them. But I think it's having the discussion with the children and then having the discussion with the parents. But if everybody knows what the rules are, you reduce that immensely in terms of accidents happening. So be proactive. Know the tools, teach the children the tools, teach them the safety, and accidents are rare rather than common case.
So Karen, you put this together, the My Nature Conservation Talking Robot. Let's talk directly to this. And this is quite an exciting one. In the background, while you're talking to that, I'm going to be just Googling one or two of the tools that are required. I can't Google at the same time. One or two of the tools that are required to be able to use My Nature Conservation Talking Robot. Yeah, how would we go about this? You're in the beginning of the term, you get your teachers together, you've got your maths teacher, geography, everyone together. How do you now get to a place where you've got an executable plan? So ideas don't mean anything without the execution. So yeah, how's the execution going to work here around your My Nature Conservation Talking Robot?
So I think the first thing is, how much timetabling time have you got, and what do you want your children to do? And then if we're using these amazing tools, you would say to children, this is what we're going to do. Start collecting the materials for your robot. So getting the children to actually start thinking about it. But remember, to get into a topic, you've got to understand it. So research and investigation is exceptionally important. And so you could get children to go and do surveys. You could get them to go and hop onto the web and research. You could get them to go in and you could have guest speakers coming in. And with the way we're using virtual now, it's really easy to have somebody that don't have to drive to the school, and you don't have to book a venue. You could all just hop into a virtual call. But get the children to know about your two topics. So in here, the two topics are life under the sea and life on land. And get the children to narrow that down. What does that mean? Are they looking at rock pools? Are they looking at deep sea? Are they looking at a forest? Are they looking at a beach? So the children can actually choose. And once they've thought about that, then they can start thinking about, so what do we need to tell people about? So the idea around the talking robot is going all into the AI and the D.I.Y kit that Google has got, where you can look at artificial intelligence and the children can go in using Python's APIs and can do some really cool stuff around that. And so the thinking is, how do you actually then develop the information around that? Now, think about that. You're teaching something to ask questions and to answer it. So there your language teacher is going to be involved. You're then going to be doing some form of coding. So that could be your teacher who does IT. or it could be your maths person, or it could be a bit of both. If they're then going to have to design it, and they're going to have to use the laser cutter to cut things out, or they're going to use 3D pens to perhaps create some of the additional activities, does that fall into STEM or the art teacher? And so you can start talking to a range of teachers and saying, how do we make this project become a global or a school-based project across the board? You could do it in one subject. It could stay in your technology or your STEM space and it not goes anywhere. You could integrate it amazingly across different things. So it depends what you want to do as a school. And then the other cool thing is, because you're making something which can be used more than just by the individual, having a night where you showcase it then becomes another aspect. So are you teaching children presentation skills and all those kinds of things? So for me, it's, what do you want to achieve? Going back again to the beginning of the thinking. Really think about how you want the project to work through, how many subjects you want to incorporate, and how you want to end up with the kind of product that you want. Then look at the equipment that you got. Sorry, go.
No. I just want to add on to this. When we were talking about creating this as a theme in a project, immediately the knee-jerk reaction is, let's look at all the fancy tools like the laser cutters, the 3D prints, the AI kits, the everything that costs quite a bit of money. And while I'm sitting here processing this, again, those same thinking skills can be achieved with little to no budget. So I'm just thinking now you could create a puppet, which could be a robot that could talk to these different real world problems. That could be the aim and the objective. And kids could go and create a robot puppet that has a script, so that when they present it in their English class, they're covering doing their oral for the term, and they're covering a whole bunch of things. It could be looking at anything in that space to be able to still achieve the same thing, but without spending the money. Again, for me, it's really important for schools and people listening to this to understand that you don't actually need to have crazy budgets to be able to achieve the same thinking skills. We've taken something here which initially you look at would probably cost about 4,000 Rand per kit, with all the materials included over a 3-month period. But yes, they can be reused in the following years, but this can also be done for free. That's where I'm looking at from.
And I think it's what knowledge do you want the children to get out of it. So if you could do a puppet and you could be teaching them about levers or about mechanisms or other kinds of technology, so that they're still learning in terms of technology, might not be digital technology, but you could still be teaching them about technology, and they could then go and see or research how that kind of technology is being used in the modern world. So always think about, what are the materials that you've got available? What tools do you have? And what knowledge do you want to get to? And it doesn't have to be paper-based, that they're just filling in worksheets. Everything we learn can be interactive and fun and engaging.
Now, how do we just address for a second the idea that teachers have still got to meet certain standards and guidelines on what they have to achieve by an end of a term? So often in my experience, some teachers that have a makerspace imposed on them are looking at this going, I have to achieve all of these things, plus I've got to do all of this. How do you bridge that gap for teachers? And I'm actually going to just pop over to the next slide. If you want to just talk to this for a moment about, still achieving what the minimum requirements are, plus having some fun.
So I really think it's, how do we look at the curriculum critically? And how do we teach it in a fun, interesting manner? So if we look at all of our curriculums, the topics in there are actually incredible. And if you look at science, if this was a grade 8 curriculum we were looking at, so in grade 8, you've got ecosystems and ecology, that you could get your robot to then talk to. So the children would have to research around one of the ecosystems, and the questions could all relate to that. And the teacher could then prompt them about what kind of information they need to be searching, so that you can actually meet those outcomes. The same as with the arts and culture, where they've got to create in 3D. So here you're saying to your students, and it also said use recyclable materials. So you could say to the students, you've got to design this robot, and this is the criteria. And it's got to be three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. So they'd have to go and research what is three-dimensional, how do we create it and put it together. So for me, looking at the curriculum critically in terms of what are we really wanting to achieve and how can we achieve it in a non-conventional manner. So what are the kinds of things that we could do to, one, expose them to real-life scenarios, but two, change the lesson that it's not always just filling in notes. Perhaps even stir the pot at school and say, can we try alternative assessments? What are the kinds of things? So if you've used the AI and it can answer certain questions, could that be used as an assessment for a child who's done some really interesting research, programmed it, and got the answers in a different way? So how are we starting to say, how do we look at schooling differently?
So a computer numerical control device is something like a 3D printer, a laser cutter, a CNC router. CNC is often misinterpreted for the device that drills out pieces of wood or metal. CNC is actually the technology that's used around 3D printers, laser cutters, and CNC routing machines. And it all works with your X, Y, and Z axis, or your Cartesian plane. And all that's actually happening here is the computer is telling the controller within one of those three devices where it needs to go on that axis. If you think about it, your traditional desktop printers that just print out A4 or A3 paper also actually work off your X, Y, and Z axis coordinates to be able to, when it needs to spill out ink, and then when it needs to kind of shift up and down, left, right, and so on and so forth. So it all works off your Cartesian plane, and it produces something called G-code, which the controller, being an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi or some sort of a microcontroller, will interpret for the motors being called stepper motors. They're called stepper motors because the most common stepper motors, they step in 0.1 millimeter increments. So as one of my favorite tools would be a laser cutter working off your X, Y, and Z axis. A laser cutter, you get different types of them. Some use UV to be able to produce a beam of light to be able to cut through your material. The most common laser cutter found is a CO2 tube. That's at the back of the laser. It bounces off some mirrors. The light bulb, which produces the light, it uses magnifying glasses, and it creates this really, really concentrated beam of I guess you could call it energy to be able to, again, cut through your material. I'm going to rattle through this and then come to the options that you have as a school or an organization to be able to use. If you are interested in getting laser cutters, be rest assured that there's this open source community where you can access free laser cut design files. We have illustrated some of the websites on our course content where you can go and laser cut a range of different things. And then just moving on to 3D printers. If you had to be in the position where you had to choose between 3D printers or laser cutters, it would be imperative to essentially choose the device that you're more passionate about or more interested in. And I say this from the point of view that when you express that passion, the kids can feel that energy, and it would definitely, be used more frequently within that classroom environment. So again, within the course content, you can go and look at how the different 3D printers that are available to be able to use. 3D printers are great to be able to express your imagination. And I love 3D printers for the fact that you can print out tools for teaching, or even with the laser cutter, laser cutting out different tools. So the saying goes, for the people, by the people, getting your grade 8s or your grade 7 students to be creating objects and projects that can be used for the grade 3s or the grade 2s. Whether it be a game, whether it be stencils for the teachers to be able to use. So really just utilizing it, not just to print out random things, but more for different things to be able to illustrate real world applications. Within this, we've given some open source websites where you can go and access 3D design files along with laser cutting files. You'll find everything from drones to litho paints to there's literally millions and millions of designs, and you'll see the open source community is just adding more and more to it. So really take advantage of that open source community. Even if you go and Google open source design files, you'll find 3D printing files, laser cutting files, CNC files, and so much more. And then just quickly talking through the CNC routing machine. Your routing machine is used where it's not additive manufacturing. Karen, you can help me with this one. Would it be considered subtractive manufacturing? Because you essentially, take your block of wood and then cut away from it.
Probably, yes.
So I think it could be referred to that as well. And it's a really fun device. I noticed that CNC machines are, for me in my personal experience, are a little bit more complicated than the laser cutters or the 3D printers. They take a lot more time and they make a lot more noise, but they're really cool to create some very, very intricate details when trying to, whether it be creating furniture or anything like that. And then within our course content, we've added additional videos here for you to be able to find out more information on 3D printing, laser cutting, and CNC machines. So in a nutshell, just to wrap up what we've discussed in today's call, we've looked at the first of 3 live sessions that we'll be hosting, talking about how you can create your own makerspace. We have included everything from budgeting to posters you can use, planning documents, different tools, cross-curricular integrations, how you can motivate and inspire your teachers, how you can inspire the community around your makerspace, and really just make it an environment which, as we said in the beginning of the call, is a catalyst for educational change. So this is an imperative space and arguably maybe one of the most important spaces in a school, Karen?
I think so. So for those of you who don't know, I taught design and technology most of my life, and I think the most important thing is you get children to think, you get children to see, and you get children to question. And so whatever tools you decide to use, they can all do that. And remember those amazing tools that Joel's just showed you? You don't have to buy the biggest, and you don't even have to buy a lot. But start with thinking about what you could put in that can slowly grow over time. You don't need to have your space all set up just today. Think about how it can grow over time.
100%. So just in preparation for the next few calls, we're going to be talking about convenient storage options, functional art within your classroom. We're going to be looking at robotics, coding, virtual reality, augmented reality, different coding applications that can be used. And we are big, big fans of the open source world and community. So rest assured that 90% of everything that we show you is free online to be able to access. We are, we've seen some really, really, really good paid for platforms that are available, like Too Simple's Purple Mash's platform is amazing. I know they've got some free things available, but it is also an awesome platform that can be used in collaboration with your makerspace and with your school. Karen, have we got any final points to give to the audience before we say goodbye?
I think go back to why you want to do it, how you're going to do it, and then what you're going to do. I think really do that planning really carefully and have the discussion with as many people as possible. The people in your staff room, the parents from your school, and even from the children. Get input from everybody so that your space will be a space that will be loved for years to come.
And from my side, just as a final note, please feel free to schedule a 15-minute call with myself, Karen, or even Matt. It's calendly.com/ThoughtAfrica/15 minutes, or MIN. But if you don't need to speak to us, please go and reach out to other people. Don't be scared. I've noticed there are the teachers from Stain City School in Johannesburg, where they've done some phenomenal things in their makerspace, have got active Instagram accounts, and they're often sharing resources on Instagram. Reach out to those teachers, reach out to teachers from anywhere in the country, ask the questions, share, and let's really create a community around this. The teachers I've met in the makerspace environment have been absolutely amazing. So really just don't be shy to go and ask the questions, and feel free to reach out to anyone. Thank you very much for tuning into this. Thank you very much, Karen. And just a big, big thank you from myself, Joel Kaplan, from Thought Africa. Thank you very much for joining this DIY Makerspace session. I really, really appreciate your time, and have a great day.